All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of your favorite podcast, The Fantasy Birds, with my normal co-host, Mr. Samuel Nettleton, and guest co-host, Mr. Tom Hickson. How you guys doing?
Good. How are you, Tom?
I'm doing really good. Doing really good.
How are you, Hunter?
I'm also good. Now, today I'm doing especially good because today we have a special episode. Today we're gonna go with some fantasy basketball. First fantasy basketball episode on the YouTube channel. So far, we're gonna be doing a little draft that we had, and we're gonna go through the picks and let you know how we did in this draft. So let's get started as anybody would in the first round of our draft, as it was pretty normal. We're going to get our comments on this first round. Honestly, if in any fantasy basketball league, points league draft that doesn't start off with Giannis Antetokounmpo and Luka Doncic, someone's doing something wrong. These are by far the best two players in the league for fantasy basketball points league. So no surprise that they go 1 and 2 there. What are your thoughts on how this first round ended up going?
I think Giannis was a steal at first overall. I love the pick. I think one thing I noted was LeBron and AD falling to 6 and 7, which I questioned a bit. But I mean, I don't dislike the 5 picks ahead of them. But if I did have to give a to this round, I would give it to Durant at 9, just because I don't really know if I want my team built around a guy that's coming back from an Achilles tear. If he comes back to, I mean, I don't think he'll ever be the way he was before, but if he comes back to all-star level, then it's a good pick. But you also don't know how healthy he's going to be this season. So I think that was kind of a risky pick at number 9 overall, but it's just my 2 cents. So, Tom?
Yes, so you kind of mentioned it, but I know whoever picked LeBron James at 6. I mean, whoever did that, I mean, that was just an incredible pick. Um, in all seriousness, though, I was very surprised to see LeBron there at 6. And not only was he there at 6, but I don't even believe he was the top player available by ESPN or whatever. But when it was my turn to pick. But I mean, yeah, look, I think LeBron was a good pick. I do agree with you that Kevin Durant is probably the riskiest player in this first round, just because, like you said, he's coming off an Achilles tear, and it's very rare to see someone, especially of that size, come back and really put first round level production after an Achilles tear. So that's gonna be something to watch for sure. I really like Jokic at 3. I'm really bullish on him just because I think it's very rare. I, I think it's very rare that when you have a big man that can do as many things as Jokic in terms of score all over the floor, but not only that, he rebounds and he gives you assists. I mean, I think there's some insane fantasy upside there. Um, one pick that I'm not necessarily questioning, but I do think it's a heavy upside pick is Jason Tatum. Is that, Jason Tatum obviously played really well down the stretch last year, and I think we all kind of saw that. Now, is he a first round level player? I still think that remains to be seen, but I don't necessarily blame Van Gundy's gangsters for taking him at number 10, especially after all the biggest fish are off the board. So that's just kind of my take. Like you said, LeBron and Anthony Davis at 6 and 7. Not necessarily, like you said, not necessarily that the guys in front of them were bad picks, but I do think that it's just good value for those two guys.
Yeah, no, look, to get back to the Laker duo that y'all mentioned earlier, I think by a point of average points per game, they're going to be very dominant, probably 3 or 4 in the league, but you don't know how they're going to rest on back-to-backs in a shortened season. So that's my main concern with those Laker guys, along with Kevin Durant. I think they plan on like resting him a couple games on back-to-backs, just coming back from that torn Achilles. So Kevin Durant maybe a little bit too early in a points league right here for me in the first round, but some guy I really like is Trae Young. I think the combination of points and assists really going to increase this year with the shooters they got around him. So I really like that Trae Young pick at the end of the first round. But
He's got
to
a
wrap it up,
lower usage rate too.
yeah. But I think he's just gonna be more efficient this year, which is gonna lead to better numbers for fantasy. But that's gonna wrap it up for round one. Round two, what hits me immediately is Shea Gilgeous-Alexander at the top of round two. Even in a 14-man league where it's stretching to the 15th pick is the first pick in the second round, but I think it's very bold to go with Shea here in a points league just based off what he did last year. He was a good player, and the Thunder are losing so many guys: Chris Paul, Gallinari, Steven Adams. So he's gonna be the dominant player on that team. But is he gonna be able to put up top of the second round numbers? I mean, I'm not buying it. I'm not gonna put my faith there at the top of the second round. So I think that was a very risky pick. And I think Joel Embiid with the third pick in the second round, I think that's money. Joel Embiid, huge points league fantasy basketball player. I think that's a steal for Joel Embiid, getting him in this early second round. But let me know what y'all think.
I mean, this won't really come as a surprise to anybody, but I think Russell Westbrook is the steal of this round. I think you're getting, when healthy, a guy who's going to put up top 3 point guard numbers at a second round value. That's why I'm very confused about this SGA pick, because I think his ceiling is Westbrook's average pretty much. I'm not too worried about his usage rate getting hurt with Bradley Beal, since he put up pretty solid numbers with Harden last year. I think it's pretty fair to expect 25, 8, and 8 from him. And I think whoever picked SGA would be thrilled to get those numbers out of him. So I love this Westbrook pick. Having Russell Westbrook as your second best player is always a good thing, in my opinion. I think the only real question with him is health. And then the Embiid pick I also like. But looking at the rest of this round, I think there's a pretty big drop-off. When you can get a guy like Westbrook as your second-best player, or later in the round, like Ja Morant or Kawhi Leonard sitting out a million games every season, that's such a big drop-off for me. I think that's going to pay major dividends to the teams that had high picks in this round. So, yeah, that's all I have to say.
So when I look at round two, to me there are 3 picks in a row that kind of stick out to me as guys that I really think can be that I think can really give you good value in the second round, and that would be picks 3, 4, and 5 in round two in this 14-team league. Like y'all mentioned, look, I know we're kind of beating a dead horse when we say Joel Embiid when healthy, like quote unquote, but I mean, it's pretty obvious. I had Embiid last year on my fantasy basketball team, and I can attest to the fact that when Embiid is healthy, he truly is a top 5 fantasy player in fantasy basketball. I don't really think production with him is the question. It's going to be more about health. Speaking of health, I think Zion Williamson is going to be available more than he was last year, and he was also picked with the next pick in the second round. I think there's some real upside there between him and Brandon Ingram, who was picked at the next pick. When I looked at those 3 guys, I'm not only looking at guys that I think were decent values, but I also think even though Zion might have been a little bit of a reach just because we don't exactly know what's up with his health and the team likes to be very cautious, I will say that I think those 3 guys have a real chance to kind of explode and put themselves on the round 1 map. I think those guys are going to produce a lot. And I think there was a lot of good picks. I think Bradley Beal was a good pick later in the round. I think Andre Drummond was a decent pick later in the round. Andre Drummond is a guy that we all know that he kind of puts up empty stats. We all know he's not really a winning player, but we do know that he's going to get you 17 and 15, and that's valuable in fantasy, no matter how valuable that is to wins and losses. Kawhi Leonard, like y'all said, I don't really know how to value this because Kawhi Leonard obviously puts up great numbers. He's very productive. but we don't know what his rest schedule is going to be like. I know the NBA tried to come in and put a hammer down on potential resting games on national TV games, but most games still aren't national TV games, and I don't know how that's going to play into it. So Kawhi Leonard was a guy that I was going to stay away from, at least in round 2. And just kind of put a bow on it. I think Ja Morant was a good pick. I think he has the potential to explode this year. He proved last year that he was good enough to be inserted into lineups confidently. He stayed pretty healthy, played the majority of the games last year, and to me, I see more growth potential with him. I really like Ja Morant. I think he's gonna take on more of a scoring role this year now that he's more comfortable to the speed of the NBA. And I think also he's going to continue developing as a facilitator. And I think he's going to take that next step production wise, I think. So that's why in the back half of round 2, I think Ja Morant was a good play.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of the things y'all mentioned. Zion. I want to add Andre Drummond. I think he's going to be dominant in fantasy basketball. I want to add, though, I do disagree on Brandon Ingram. I think we saw his ceiling last year when it comes to fantasy was the beginning of last year without a Zion Williamson. His numbers were extremely good. They were probably second-round numbers right where you would take him right now. But adding a Zion Williamson, I think, is going to, just give him less opportunities to score the basketball and just to facilitate and everything. So I think adding Zion to a Pelicans team is going to limit Brandon Ingram's ceiling in fantasy. So I'm not as high on Brandon Ingram here in the points league. I'd probably back him up to the next round. But to get an all-star in round 2, look, you're not feeling too bad about that. I also want to mention Drew Holiday.
You go ahead.
I wanted to mention Drew Holiday. I think at the back of the second round, I think probably one of the picks I least like in this round, just because going from a Pelicans team where he was, a ball-dominant player to go with a Brandon Ingram in the half court, to go to a Milwaukee team with a Giannis Antetokounmpo, with a Chris Middleton. I think Drew Holiday's numbers are going to go down across the board, and to get him in the second round, even in a 14-team league at the back half of it, I'm just not a fan of Drew Holiday that high in a draft.
I love Drew, but I got to agree with you there, because here's the way I put it. You have Drew Holiday at the very end of round 2. Who would you rather have, Drew Holiday or Bam Adebayo? Because to me, I'm going Adebayo 10 times out of 10. That's just me.
Yeah, I think Drew Holiday's value is more in probably the late third round to early fourth round, if I'm being totally honest, just because I think, like I said, the stats are going to come down in each category if I had to guess.
I don't know. I think if anything, his stats should stay around the same. He's got Giannis to pass the ball to, so I feel like he'll be flirting with 8 or 9 assists a night. And let's not forget what he did at the end of the last season when he was a top 4 point guard, I think, in fantasy. And I wouldn't say the Pelicans don't have many options. I mean, he was the third option on the Pelicans at the end of the year last year, so. And he's just on a much better team now. I think he'll be more efficient in every category. That's probably the thought process of the person you picked in there.
Yeah, that's a valid option. We're just going to have to wait and see how he does in a Milwaukee Buck uniform. But if y'all are good, that's going to wrap up our first 2 rounds as we head into round number 3 of our draft. And the first picks of the third round, which were Donovan Mitchell, Bam Adebayo, Paul George, Rudy Gobert, Vucevic, Fox, Jamal Murray, and Chris Paul, the first 8 picks of that draft. What immediately stands out to me is Paul George. I think Paul George last season struggled late to put up points in fantasy basketball points league setting. Much better in a rotisserie league where steals and blocks are more valuable, or mainly steals. But in a points league, Paul George in the third round this high, just not a huge fan of that. But Bam Adebayo, I think, is a big steal here in Miami. He puts up numbers across the board. He's going to be a solid player. And then I think probably the best pick of the round was, I would say, De'Aaron Fox. I think getting him this late in the third round, the numbers that he's going to put up, the progression he's going to make, putting up points, assists, and some rebounds here and there, I think De'Aaron Fox was by far the best pick in round 3 of this draft.
Yeah, I agree with the Paul George analysis. I think because I was definitely considering taking him with my pick, but I learned from last year to stay away from guys who consistently get rested. I mean, there's no telling how much he'll get rested this year since like he was coming back from an injury year. So I think, especially in our league where you're not required to have a small forward, I think it's really important. The league settings set up to where you can potentially start 6 power forwards in your starting lineup. I think the value of a small forward goes down tremendously because they obviously are less likely to get double doubles than a power forward, which is what I'm looking at when the 2 picks right after Gobert and Vucevic, or however you say his name. Those are guys that are going to play the full season likely and put up consistent double doubles, average double double, versus Paul George, he can get you 24, 5 and 5, but on how many games? And even at that rate, that's still taking the hit when you're not getting the double doubles from him. So, well,
yeah. So when I look at round 3, I agree with Hunter that De'Aaron Fox is a really good pick. Bam Adebayo, like I said, also a really good pick as you know, the second pick in round 3, who I would have been very comfortable taking early round 2, to be honest. Round 3 to me is when I start to look at this and see, you know, maybe we might start seeing guys who aren't necessarily worth a 3rd round pick, and maybe this is just a product of the size of the league, as you know, because obviously when you have more teams and more players each round, you're going to have, you know, you're going to have obviously more guys per round that you don't necessarily think should go there, and that's kind of what I'm seeing. I'm seeing a lot of guys like, you know, Yusuf Nurkic. Yusuf Nurkic. He's still kind of recovering from that injury that he had a couple years ago, and we don't really know what his outlook is. Obviously, he's an integral member of that team, but I think that remains to be seen. Tobias Harris, I really don't like in the 3rd round. I think he was very inconsistent and proved to be nothing more than just kind of a spot shooter, you know, relatively high usage guy. But to me, there are still 3 picks that jump off the page for me in round 3, and that the first would be Bam Adebayo at the 2nd pick of the 3rd round. Again, I think he's a guy that's sneaky. He gets assists. He passes the ball really well. Obviously, he rebounds. He catches lobs. He gets blocks. He does a lot of things that kind of fills up the stat sheet from multiple ways. De'Aaron Fox, to me, I just think this is a guy that is going to explode this year. I think he's going to get a lot of usage. And I think now that it's his 3rd year, he kind of made a really positive step last year, and I just think that's going to go. I just think that's going to continue forward with it. I really like De'Aaron Fox and kind of how he projects this year. And then the third pick that really jumps off the page to me for being a really good pick was Domantas Sabonis at the 9th pick in the 3rd round. Listen, I know he's not the flashiest guy. I know he's not necessarily a brand name. I mean, we're all obviously familiar with Domantas Sabonis, but you know, not a guy that's gonna jump off the page at you at first. But when you really remember what he put up last year, I mean, this guy was one of the best value picks in fantasy. Like Domantas Sabonis last year was one of those guys where if you drafted him late enough, like that guy was a league winner. That guy is a guy that could tilt the scales in your favor if you have enough firepower in your team. So I think Domantas Sabonis in the 3rd round is a really good pick. If he would have gone in the back half of round 2, I wouldn't have been mad about it. But I think Domantas Sabonis and De'Aaron Fox, De'Aaron Fox, and Bam Adebayo for me are the 3 guys that I would take as the best picks in round 3.
Yeah, no, to echo that sentiment, I think Sabonis is probably the biggest value in this round. he probably belongs going in the second round if we're being totally honest. But also Tobias Harris, I think he belongs nowhere near the third round. To be quite frank, just so reliant on only points and rebounds and not really having the ball in his hands as much when you got guys like Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid in the lineup. So Tobias Harris, not a third round pick for me, but I really like Jusuf Nurkic at the back end of the third round. I think this guy's going to come back and play very well for a Trailblazers team that's losing Hassan Whiteside. We saw what he did last year. He was a second round kind of guy average-wise at the end of the year. So I think Nurkic is going to fill in nicely right there, and he's going to put up big numbers. And to get him in the back end of the third round, I think very sneaky pick right there in a 14-team league.
But little disagreement. I like it.
That's going to wrap it up for the third round. Let's go straight into the fourth round. And our top picks were John Collins, John Wall, Brogdon, Middleton, C.J. McCollum, Gordon Hayward, Fred VanVleet, T.J. Warren, Mike Conley, Julius Randle, Kelly Oubre, Draymond Green, Devontae Graham, and Kristaps Porzingis. What stands out here to me is, again, at the top of the round, John Collins. I think last year he was about a second-round pick. This year, adding a Clint Capella, adding a Danilo Gallinari. I'm not sure if I like John Collins in beginning of the fourth round, but the athletic talent is off the charts. So, he might be able to hit this ADP right here. But for me, I think John Collins is a little bit lower. And then John Wall, I think, is one to keep an eye on because if he stays healthy and plays like the John Wall that we've seen in the past, I think he's going to demolish this fourth round pick. But it's going to be interesting to see how he plays this season coming off two pretty disgusting injuries. So top two picks this round stand out to me. But what do you guys think of the round number 4?
Yeah, I was gonna say for John Wall, I mean he's already shown in preseason that he's pretty much back in form. I think the only question with him is staying healthy again, but definitely if that is the case, which it hasn't been for most of his career, but if it is, then I think he's at least second round value. And also, I think I wanted to note is doesn't look likely at this point, but if Harden gets traded, I think John Wall automatically turns into a first round value. And then the other thing I'm looking at here is T.J. Warren at 8 in the fourth round. I mean, I think it might be hit with a little bit of recency bias. I know he was solid last year, and I'm not totally in love with any of the players in this area of the draft, but it's a guy who is going to give you points and pretty much nothing else, maybe 5 rebounds a game. But, I mean, it's all nice when he can go off for 50 and all, but I'm not convinced that I want him as my fourth best player, especially with Oladipo healthy now and being the number one. I mean, he should be the number one option on that team, but I just don't really see the value there for him.
Yeah, so in the fourth round, and I might kind of bounce around here, but Kelly Oubre Jr. is really interesting to me. And this is only because Klay Thompson is going to be missing time. So I think there's going to be a lot of shots for the taking for the wing position for the perimeter in Golden State. I think there's going to be a lot of shots opening up for Kelly Oubre. And he's also a really long, really athletic guy. I mean, he's going to get rebounds. He's going to get blocks and steals as a perimeter guy, or at least steals. Kelly Oubre is a guy that was putting up really good numbers last year in his first kind of really expanded role. Now, granted he was in Phoenix, but now I do think the Golden State Warriors brought him in to be one of the key pieces of their lineup. And I think Kelly Oubre could be an interesting guy. Whether or not he actually puts up round 4 value remains to be seen, but he's definitely a guy I'm going to be keeping my eye on. Draymond Green was picked a pick later, and he's also of the Golden State Warriors, obviously. And this is a guy that I'm not necessarily as high on. I think he's kind of peaked already. I think what we've seen 3 years ago was a guy that could get you, 10, 10, and 10 on any given night. And really fill up the box score, kind of a jack of all trades type of guy that can give you production, and it would all the sum of the parts, or the whole would be better than the sum of the parts, kind of when you look at the type of production he brings to the table. Again, I think that time has kind of passed. I think what we're going to see is Draymond. I think we're going to see Draymond in less of a usage role, especially with Steph Curry coming back and everyone coming back. They're bringing in Kelly Oubre. They brought in Andrew Wiggins. So, those guys are obviously going to command a lot of shots. So that's going to really take away any, shooting value that Green might have. Obviously, the assists might be there. The rebounds will be there. He's still going to be a good defender, but round 4, I don't know if I'm ready for that. Now, Fred VanVleet was a guy that produced really well last year, and what impressed me about Fred VanVleet in Toronto, obviously he got a big contract extension recently, so good for him. But Fred VanVleet was a guy that proved that he could produce next to Kyle Lowry. So what we're seeing is that one isn't necessarily going to be taken away from each other. They both can have standalone value. So Fred VanVleet is interesting for me in round 4. Malcolm Brogdon is a guy, like I said, I think he's going to take a step back with Oladipo coming back and taking up a lot of the offensive usage. But I still think he's going to have the ball in his hands a decent amount. I think he's going to be a guy that can give you decent production, both as a wing rebounder and a secondary ball handler where he can dish, and he's got a lot of good players on that team that can really get the most out of his assists. The one thing I'll say about John Wall, I know y'all are gassing him up, and I agree that if he can maintain that usage and if he can kind of carve out that role in Houston, I really think there's a lot of upside to be had there. And that's why I understand this pick, but I'm really skeptical as to whether we're going to see the John. The thing about John Wall is I do agree that there's a lot of upside there when you talk about the role that's the role that we're talking about. This is a power vacuum that Russell Westbrook left open. And while he's a ball dominant player, look, John Wall is a guy that can definitely outperform this, not only his ADP, but also where he was drafted. The beginning of round 4, the production really can be there. However, like y'all, I am very bullish on his potential, on the type of numbers that he can put up. But the thing about John Wall is that I'm just not. He needs to prove to me that he can be the same type of player, because John Wall is a guy that relies a lot on his explosiveness, a lot on his athleticism, and I think a lot of that gets zapped away when you have so many significant lower body injuries that he's had. So, listen, I think the potential is there for John Wall, but I don't think he's going to be the same type of player, and I think that is still going to affect his fantasy stats one way or another. He can definitely put himself at round 2 value eventually in round 4, once the dust settles and once he gets kind of back into the swing of things. But yeah, John Wall, to me, I'm a little skeptical just because of the injury. I don't know if he's going to be back to the same player he was before.
Yeah, when you get to round 4 in a 14-man draft, the talent starts to slide down a mountain very quickly. And one of the notable players in this round I see is Kristaps Porzingis hanging at the bottom of this round. And I think it's interesting. In the 4th round, you're not getting those top-end players that are going to put up, anywhere from 35 to 40 points a game, fantasy points a game anymore. So to go and get a Kristaps Porzingis who's going to put up those numbers when healthy in this round, late in the end of the 4th round, I think it's a not a bad pick considering what he's going to be when he is healthy. Now, if he comes back in a month, it's a good pick. If he comes back in 2 or 3 months, maybe not as much. So it's going to be interesting to see on the timetable of that injury and when he comes back. But when healthy, he's definitely, a round 2 or 3 guy in almost any format. But that's going to take us to round number 5 as we start getting to the meat and potatoes of this draft. And it starts out with Christian Wood, Aaron Gordon, Steven Adams, Victor Oladipo, LaMarcus Aldridge, Montrezl Harrell, Robert Covington, Jonas Valanciunas, LaMelo Ball, Wiggins, Clint Capella, Hassan Whiteside, Al Horford, and Rui Hachimura. So give me y'all's thoughts on a couple players you see having big seasons and maybe some players that shouldn't have been drafted this highly in a fantasy basketball points league draft.
I mean, I like Christian Wood this year. I think he was really budding star at the end of last season on the Pistons, I believe. And I think he'll put up some pretty massive numbers as the big man in that Houston offense. But I mean, I think the clear question mark in this round is Rui Hachimura at the last pick, especially looking to round 6 and seeing Jaylen Brown was on the table. I just don't understand this pick at all. I'm not sure how I can see Hachimura putting up bigger numbers than Jaylen Brown when he's got two extremely ball-dominant players and Bradley Beal and Russell Westbrook on the team now. So,
yeah, round 5, I agree that Christian Wood was a guy that I definitely wanted. Christian Wood, obviously he was on a different team with Detroit. Now he's in Houston, but I still think he's going to get a lot of run for them. I think he's going to put up a lot of good numbers. I wanted him, and it was a shame that he couldn't quite make it to me for my next pick. But I think at the top of round 5, I think Christian Wood is a guy that can really ascend for his value. So that's definitely my favorite pick of the round. I'm not exactly sure how Steven Adams is going to factor into the Pelicans' front court rotation. I mean, obviously he's going to be the starter at center. We do know that, and we do know that at certain times, Derek Favors was able to put up some decent numbers, even when he was next to Zion Williamson. However, Steven Adams is an upgrade over Derek Favors, both in production and on the court. I think that's an interesting pick there, and I think for rebounds and block shots value, I think that's a decent pick there. Victor Oladipo, decent pick there as well. I think the thing about Victor Oladipo is that he's still going to get a lot of the scoring volume. I think he because he missed a lot of time, it's easy to see why he slipped down this far. And frankly, I don't know if I would have drafted him necessarily very much higher than this, but I think he's going to get a lot of scoring value, and I think the value for round 5 is good for him. Another pick that I like in the top half of round 5 is Montrezl Harrell. I think the thing about Montrezl Harrell is he's been productive, whether he's been a starter or a bench guy. It doesn't really matter for him, and that can affect a lot of guys in their production. But he's kind of proven that as a 6-man energy type big that can come in, get rebounds and putbacks, get you double doubles off the bench. I think that's really valuable, and he's proven that no matter where he goes, he's always going to have. He's kind of like Lou Williams, right? No matter what team he goes, he's always going to kind of have that bench role for him to where he's going to get 25 to 30 minutes a night and put up good numbers. The second half of round 5 isn't quite as enticing. I like Hassan Whiteside as a guy, again, just a straight up stat patter. We know this about Hassan Whiteside. So he's always going to be a decent fantasy option. I'm intrigued to see what Al Horford is going to be as well. I think, obviously he was a big disappointment last year in Philly, but I think in this new environment that he's going to be in, I think there is a chance that he can improve his efficiency that was just god awful last season. Clint Capella, I don't like that pick, and I don't like Rui Hachimura either at this value. Speaking as someone who had Hachimura for various periods of time last year on his team, Rui Hachimura to me, I'm not sold this high, man. I think Hachimura would be a great pick in round 7 or 8, but in round 5, I just think there's more players that you could have gone with, even with the last pick in the 5th round. So yeah, Rui Hachimura, he's gonna get some volume. There's not a lot on the wing, or not a lot really in that front court. Who else do they have? Thomas Bryant. I mean, that's not really. I think there's going to be some production there, but Rui Hachimura in round 5 to me is just way too high.
Yeah, a couple notable guys that I see. Aaron Gordon at the top of the round. I think missing a Jonathan Isaac for a majority of the season, if not all of the season, going to pay dividends for Aaron Gordon. Look for him.
I forgot about that. That's a good point.
Steven Adams, I'm not a huge fan of this pick just because this team is centered around Zion Williamson, and I don't know how they paired together on the court at the same time. So Steven Adams might have a dip in his production compared to last year on a Thunder team. Victor Oladipo is another question mark. Coming off that injury, didn't look as good as he did before. So round 5, it's a little sketchy for me. And the main one in this round for me is Robert Covington. I think this is 3, 4, 5 rounds too early for Robert Covington. He's not a very good points league fantasy basketball player. Not going to get many points, rebounds, or assists on a Portland team that has Damian Lillard, C.J. McCollum, Carmelo Anthony, and Yusuf Nurkic. So I think Robert Covington is by far the worst pick in this round, right in front of Rui Hachimura. But Robert Covington way too high for me. And then a LaMelo Ball, high upside guy, but low floor guy for me this year. So not sure LaMelo Ball in this round is a very solid pick. But that's going to wrap it up for our round 5. Let's get right in.
Yeah, I wanted to say I just noticed that the team that picked Hachimura picked Jaylen Brown the next round. So forget all my statements about that.
Well, still, look, it's definitely fair to say that Rui Hachimura is still picked way too early in the end of round 5 from what we've said. But Jaylen Brown, to get us into the 6th round, I think he's a solid pick in the 6th round. He's got room to improve. His stats are probably going to go up across the board, losing a Gordon Hayward and a Kemba Walker out for, who knows how long with his problems that he's had recently. So Jaylen Brown, I think, is a very solid pick in round 6. Dennis Schroeder, next pick, followed by Jerian Grant, Lonzo Ball, Tyler Hero, DeLon Wright, Mitchell Robinson, Michael Porter Jr., Eric Bledsoe, Blake Griffin, Buddy Hield, Lou Williams, Colin Sexton, and Kevin Love to end the 6th round. So what stands out to you guys in round 6?
I really like Lonzo at the 4th pick. I think he's a guy that's become underrated, especially for fantasy purposes. I think at the end of the last season, he really started to pick it up, especially once Zion was healthy and playing. And I think he's got the potential to take a leap this year. Yeah, and especially in a points league where you're not hurt by field goal percentage or anything. I mean, this is the only guy in the round besides maybe Blake Griffin who is a consistent double-double threat and potential triple-double threat. So, I mean, I don't think the floor is too low, and I think the ceiling's pretty high, so I like that. I like that pick.
Round 6, Jaylen Brown, I think, is good value here, and I also like Dennis Schroeder. With him being on a new team for the Lakers, they needed a guy that they could have at the point guard position, which obviously, as you know, when you play with LeBron, a point guard really isn't necessarily a true point guard. He's just kind of a secondary ball handler / scorer and shooter. Dennis Schroeder is a guy that can get hot on any given night. And the thing about Schroeder is he can use his speed and his streaky shooting to kind of complement himself really well in that starting lineup next to LeBron. So I do think that there is some potential there. Lonzo Ball is also a guy that just his game lends itself really well to fantasy when you talk about all the assists that he racks up steals, and he can attack the basket, but he's not really that much of a scorer. But his improved 3-point shot has really helped his fantasy chances. So I think Lonzo Ball was a guy that I was definitely kind of targeting. Unfortunately, he wasn't there when I was picking. I do think Blake Griffin is probably. I would argue that Blake Griffin is probably the best pick of this round, just when you look at the production he's had in the past, and also his willingness to play through injuries. I think that's something that's very rare that we don't really see in the NBA too much. Is a guy that, even when he's hurt, he's willing to kind of throw his body around. And I know it's funny because he was kind of a guy that nobody really liked his first few years, and he's kind of morphed into a guy that is all of a sudden pretty likable. And I know that's just a personality thing, but I think that's I think that translates to fantasy in a way. I think Blake Griffin, when you look at some of the picks in rounds 4 and 5, and even in the first half of round 6, I think there's no way Blake Griffin should have lasted this long. So I would say that's probably the best pick of this round. Kevin Love is also a guy just to keep an eye on, because I think there's going to be I do think there's going to be a carved out role for him. And again, Kevin Love has always been a guy whose game really kind of lends itself well to fantasy. So yeah, I would say that the best pick of the round would be Blake Griffin. DeLon Wright, not exactly sure how that's going to work out. So if I had to choose a guy in round 6 that I was really unsure of, I'd probably go with DeLon Wright because I don't know how it's going to translate.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of things that you said right there, except for one. I think Dennis Schroeder. This is way too high for Dennis Schroeder, coming off a year where he played pretty well last year for the Oklahoma City Thunder, and to add him to the Los Angeles Lakers, where he is going to be with a LeBron James, a ball dominant player, and Anthony Davis, a Montrezl Harrell. I don't see him carving out the same stats that he did in Oklahoma City, where he was barely a fantasy starter then. So to pick him in the beginning of round 6 when he goes to a Laker team, not a huge fan. I know they want him to be a starter now, whatever, but when you're a starter for the Lakers, that means you're on the floor with LeBron, and LeBron's going to have the ball in his hands. So not a huge fan of Dennis Schroeder right there.
I will push back on one thing though, because the thing about Dennis Schroeder, one of the reasons why I'm okay with this pick here in round 6 is because Dennis Schroeder put up even borderline starter numbers last year, and there were still 2 other point guards that they used on that team. Remember, this is a team that had Chris Paul, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and Dennis Schroeder, and they were able to kind of even with that log jam at point guard, they're able to kind of figure out a way to make it work. What I see is, yeah, we understand that we understand that there is a dilemma of being a point guard in a LeBron-led offense, which means you're really not a point guard. LeBron's kind of like the power guard, the engine that makes it run. We understand that, but at the same time, I just simply don't think there's going to be the same type of log jam at point guard. I think he's going to be able to get on the floor more than he was able to get. I think he'll be able to get on the floor more than he was in OKC, and that's why I think it kind of lends itself to more production. But I mean, it could go either way.
Yeah, to get back to the round 6, look, there's a lot of guys in this round that I'm not a huge fan of where they were drafted. To start out with, well, other than Jerian Grant, I think that's a very good pick in the 6th round. His upside is off the charts, especially if a Blake Griffin gets injured. I think he's going to dominate boards and just improve overall. So I think I like that pick a lot. But Tyler Hero, DeLon Wright, like you said, Mitch Robinson, I think these 3 guys back to back, just not someone I'm ready to pick in the 6th round for a points league. Tyler Hero, he's relying on points, and they projected to put up 17 points a game this year. I don't see that getting to a fantasy starter, so draft him in the 6th round I think is way too high. DeLon Wright, he's never really been a good basketball player, so just because he's on the Detroit Pistons now and it projected to have a huge role, don't think he's going to be that good in fantasy. And then Mitchell Robinson, we've been waiting for years for this guy to be good, and it hasn't really happened. So just too early for me with Mitchell Robinson. But Lou Williams also, we've seen what Lou Williams is. He's a bench player. He's a good scorer, bench player, but fantasy, that doesn't really matter. So more of an NBA role player, not really fantasy relevant for me here. And Colin Sexton and Kevin Love, 2 Cleveland Cavaliers that end our round number 6. I really like Colin Sexton's upside here. I think he has the potential to make a huge jump this year. And then Kevin Love, I think getting him this late, if he stays healthy, even with Andre Drummond eating all those boards, I think Kevin Love still, he's a threat to go for 20 and 10 any given night. So I think that's pretty good value here late if he's able to stay healthy. But let's get into our round number 7, where he would start off with DeJounte Murray, Miles Turner, the rookie Tyrese Halliburton, Karis LeVert, Markelle Fultz, Jaren Jackson Jr., Obi Toppin, Kemba Walker, Mike Conley, Lau Markkinen, Ricky Rubio, Kobe White, Gallinari, and Marvin Bagley. Let me get you guys' thoughts on this round.
Can you scroll down on the?
Yeah, I was about to say.
I think my favorite pick of this round is Kobe White. I think we saw pretty major flashes of the upside, especially at the end of last year. He was really, really good. And we should see him take that sophomore leap this year. Another sneaky pick that I like is Mike Conley. I think he's become a bit underrated because he had a down year last year and he had some trouble staying healthy. But we saw him have an uptick in his game in the bubble. And I think if he can revert back to the player he was on the Grizzlies in some sort of way, then he's a really good pick for this round. Not many picks that I'm scratching my head at. The Obi Toppin pick is interesting to me because I think it's a high risk, high reward pick when you look at the other guys who are on the board still. We might see him take over as the number one option in the Knicks offense, but there's also that floor of being a rookie and not knowing what he's going to be yet. But from what we've seen in the preseason so far, it looks like he's a pretty solid player. So I think that'll be an interesting pick to keep note of.
There's a few guys that I like in round 7, man. I think round 7. I think that round 7 is going to be one of the rounds that when we look back on who are the best teams in this league. I think round 7 is going to be kind of one of those rounds that has those guys that can move the needle for you when you don't really expect them to at this point. Marvin Bagley, I think, is a very interesting guy. I think, we're not exactly sure what his volume is going to be, especially with Hassan Whiteside kind of soaking up a lot of those blocks and rebounds in the front court. But they're obviously really high on Bagley, and they're going to try to get him involved. But other picks that I really like here, I think this is around the time when it starts to be good value for Kemba Walker. I know last year wasn't really what everyone had hoped for out of Kemba Walker, and it was kind of similar to Mike Conley in that regard, where they both go to new teams last year and they kind of struggle in their new spots and they struggle with injuries. But again, what you said about Mike Conley, I kind of second that, but I'll kind of say the same about Kemba Walker. I think that at this point in the draft, Kemba Walker is a guy that I think there's definitely a path for him to outperform his draft position. Now, like you said, Sammy, Coby White, I love this pick, man. I really do. Coby White, I think, was a guy I think is a guy that is going to be one of the biggest second-year risers from that rookie class. He put up good numbers down the stretch last year, and I just think he's going to be more comfortable. I think he's going to be more comfortable, especially when you get the cancer of Jim Boylan out of that locker room. I think they're going to open it up a little bit more, and I think they're going to allow Coby White to kind of play his game, which is fast, transition, shoot a lot. I think and also get a lot of dimes. I really think Coby White is a guy that's going to ascend to I think he's going to really improve in his second year, and I think that's going to be big for him. DeJounte Murray, also an incredible pick. This is a guy that he's very athletic getting to the basket, but he's one of the best perimeter defenders in the NBA. He's going to rack up steals. He's good in transition. He's a good rebounder as a guard. He's got incredible length. I think he's another one of those guys, like we said, there's going to be, consistent stat stuffing potential where he can really give you value in every single category. Even though this is a total points league and not a categories league, I still think that DeJounte Murray is gonna give you enough production to be worth your while. Here's the thing about Miles Turner is that he's not very good. So I think the idea of Miles Turner is better in both in fantasy and in real life. I think the idea of Miles Turner is better than the reality of it. And just one more pick that I want to talk about is Jaren Jackson Jr., power forward for the Memphis Grizzlies. The thing about Jaren Jackson is that he is gonna miss a little bit of time, so he's gonna miss some time in the beginning of the year. But I think that Jaren Jackson Jr. is a guy that when he becomes healthy, when he gets back onto the court, I think this is also a guy that can kind of ramp it up. And by the end of the year, you're talking about a guy that can vastly outperform a round seven status. So it's just a matter of being patient with him. But I do like the pick just because of what he can be when he comes back. So especially with IR spots available, I think it's a worthy gamble at this point.
Yeah, there's a couple rookie point guards I'm looking at that, or rookies in general, that I'm not a fan at this position in the draft. Starting with Tyrese Halliburton. You're getting a backup point guard in round 7. I'm just not a huge fan of that, even though Tyrese Halliburton was one of the players in the draft that a lot of people had their eye on outside of the top 6 or 7. But to get him in the 7th round, backup point guard, not a huge fan of that move right there. Markelle Fultz, I'm looking for him to have a huge blow up year this year. First overall pick a couple years back. I think this might be the year he gets it right, or gets the train moving in the right direction. So I think that's solid upside in the 7th round. Obi Toppin, the rookie out of New York. Look, this he's box office. He's going to make huge plays. He's going to get steals and big time dunks with his athleticism, but I don't think it translates to a very productive basketball player and fantasy basketball player in the long run. So I'm not a huge fan of Obi Toppin right here. But the last thing I want to get to in this round, other than you've already talked about Colby White, I think he's a great pick this late. He's got huge upside. Losing Chris Dunn, the main guy on that Chicago Bulls team, I think he makes a big jump this year. But Marvin Bagley at the end of this round, I think, is a very solid pick. Coming off an injury-plagued year last year, I look for him to have a big bounce-back year, even with Rashawn Holmes and a Hassan Whiteside on the team. I think Marvin Bagley is due for a big one. So I really like that pick at the end of the round. That's going to take us to our 8th round, where it started with Kevin Huerter, Josh Richardson, Brandon Clark, Dante DiVincenzo, Marcus Smart, Mason Plumlee, Rashawn Holmes, Evan Fournier, Spencer Dinwiddie, Thomas Bryant, Jared Allen, Otto Porter Jr., Bridges, and Bogdan Bogdanovic.
Yeah, so I think this is where the draft starts to get pretty boring. This is where you're going to get your middling bench players who you're looking for high upside or replacements if one of your starters get hurt. Which, going off that note, my favorite pick in this round is Dinwiddie, because he's a guy that's going to have his value on its own as coming off the bench, I'm assuming, behind Kyrie. But given Kyrie's injury history, I really like Dinwiddie because he's shown that he can put up all-star level stats when given the starting role. And I'm not too worried about the fact that he'd have to share with Durant and what's his name, Karis LeVert, because I think if anything that'll just boost his assist numbers. So I really like Dinwiddie this late. A guy who can have his own value with Kyrie healthy and boost into an automatic starter if and probably when Kyrie gets hurt. So that's all I really have to say about this round.
Yeah, I gotta agree with your assessment on Spencer Dinwiddie. I think the scoring volume is going to be there regardless of whether or not Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and Karis LeVert are involved in that offense. I think he's kind of done enough to carve out a role on that team, and I think he's gonna have decent volume. He's gonna put up points. He's gonna give you assists, and I think he's gonna be a big part of what they do, especially in that second unit where the beginning of the second quarter is second quarters. Mid to late third quarters, especially when, he's out there running the second team. Maybe they're staggering their superstars, so maybe they've got one of their other big guys on the floor with them. But I really like Dinwiddie's value at this point in the draft. Kevin Huerter is a guy that I'm looking at Kevin Huerter because I think there's a lot of potential with him as a player, and I know that doesn't always translate necessarily to fantasy value, but I think he's someone that can take a leap this year. He's a young guy with a lot of scoring potential. He's had some. I think he's really carved out a role for himself on Atlanta. So it's just going to be a matter of how often will Trae Young get him the ball? How often will they scheme him up some looks compared to Gallinari and Trae Young and John Collins? So we'll see about that. But I do think there's some upside there with Kevin Huerter. All things considered. And again, y'all know I kind of like guys that can put up stats in multiple different areas, and I think Marcus Smart is a guy that can do that. He's gonna get you steals. He's gonna get you steals, assists. He's gonna be a very streaky shooter. So we know that he's gonna be. We know that his scoring is definitely gonna be pretty erratic. So again, when you're in round 8, there's not a lot of guys that can swing the pendulum per se. But I just think as a guy, for a guy that you can feel comfortable with plugging him into a lineup, if maybe one of your guys gets hurt, I think you can do a lot worse than Marcus Smart putting him, having to stick him in there. But like I said, he's still not a guy that you're gonna just absolutely throw into your starting lineup. And neither is Dinwiddie necessarily, but I think he can be a quality backup. And yeah, I mean that's pretty much it for round 8. I don't think there was too much that was really going on in this round, to be honest.
All right, well, only guys I want to talk about, Brandon Clark with a Jaren Jackson Jr. injury. I think he might be a solid fill-in for a while. And then just a guy, Miles Bridges with a Gordon Hayward injury. See what he can do. But as we start winding down this draft, let's just give me one player in the last couple of rounds. Let's go round by round. Give me one player you think that's going to have a big outbreak season or has the most possibility of having one.
Yeah. We got 9 minutes left. Just making sure y'all knew.
Just give me one guy.
I'm looking at Terry Rozier and Elfrid Payton. I'm going to give you 2 because when looking at the guys in the rest of this round, they're role players at best, and I think there's the 2 guys that could be second or third scoring options on their team. So.
Yeah, I'll also give 2 guys. PJ Washington is one of them. The power forward from Charlotte. Obviously, the beginning of last year, he kind of trailed off later on, but he was putting up really good numbers for the first 15, 20 games or so last year. I think he's a guy that does have a lot of potential. Again, at this point, I think you're looking for upside if nothing else. And then RJ Barrett is also a guy who's going into his second year. He's going to have heavy usage on the New York Knicks. I think he's a guy that can really potentially come into his own and be a steal this late in the draft.
Yeah, I like those 3 myself. My guy's going to be Aaron Baines from the Toronto Raptors. I think Toronto losing Serge Ibaka, Marc Gasol, somebody's got to get those rebounds. So I think Aaron Baines is due for some boards and a little bit of usage. So like Aaron Baines this late in the draft. Let's go to the next round. We got round 10. And I'm going to start it off because this player I really like here, and it's Wendell Carter Jr. from Chicago Bulls. I think a new coach is going to help him out a lot. And I look to him to have a breakout season potentially, getting back to, his ways from Duke. 7th overall pick for Chicago Bulls. I look for him to have a good year.
I like Derek White. I think when he played last year, when he got decent minutes, he was a pretty solid player. I'm pretty sure he's back up right now to DeJounte, but I think he'll probably become the starting shooting guard if DeMar gets traded, in which case he'll have a much bigger role. So that's why I'm looking at him.
I'm going to look at Dillon Brooks here. I just think there's going to be a lot of scoring potential. Again, he's not going to be a guy that's going to give you a lot of different avenues of production per se. But yeah, Dillon Brooks I think is going to have a very clear role as a scorer. And I think when you have someone that can score even, potentially 17, 18 points a game this late in the draft, I do think it's worth it, even if he's kind of lacking in the other areas.
All right, that's going to take us to our last round. And for me, the guy that stands out here is Kevin Garnett. I look for him to come out of retirement, put up 20 and 15 like he's used to, having a solid year. So if he's available in the last round, I suggest taking him.
Yeah, I'm a big Kevin Garnett fan. Getting a Hall of Famer at round 11 is pretty shocking. So kind of amazed that was able to happen, but definitely the steal of the draft.
And I know you closed it out before I could really get all the names, but that's okay. Again, I don't see how there's any way you can not go with Kevin Garnett. I mean, Hall of Fame production, and he's given you probably, I don't know how long was he in the league? Like 18 years? Shit, I think he'll give you 18 more. I think this is a cornerstone of your franchise, and getting him in the last round, I think is definitely worth it. So yeah, best pick of the whole draft is Kevin Garnett.
Hell yeah. All right. That's going to wrap it up for our fantasy basketball mock draft 14-team points league settings. We're the Fantasy Birds. We thank you for coming around. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, boys.
See y'all later.